The most famous statue in the Louvre has no head and no arms. For 75 years, every expert who tried to finish her put a trumpet in her missing hand. Then in 1950, that hand came out of the ground. It was open, and it was empty. Start with what isn't there. She has no head, no arms, no feet. Her right wing is not marble at all, it's plaster, a mirror image of the left one, made in the 1880s, because the real one was never recovered. She stands on the front of a warship carved from gray stone, and one block of that ship is still lying on a Greek island, because the man who took the rest of it decided it was too big to move. Nobody knows for certain which battle she was built to celebrate. The best guesses span 138 years of history. That's the distance between the American Civil War and today, and scholars cannot narrow it further than that. Nobody knows for certain who carved her. The name usually given comes from a broken piece of stone, with two words left on it, reconstructed by one scholar in 1931, and she is missing her head so completely that the man who found her went back to that island twice more, over 28 years, looking for it. He never found it, nobody has, and there is a reason all of that is missing together, which nobody tells you, and which explains the whole problem. She was never carved from one block. She is 6. The body is one piece. The chest and head were a second piece. Each arm was its own block, and so was each wing. 6 separate pieces of marble cut separately, then locked together with metal clamps, with the wings pitched about 20 degrees forward, so that the weight hanging off her back didn't tip her over, which means the head and the arms were not broken off her. They were never part of her in the first place. They were bolted on, and a bolted joint is exactly the thing that fails first. So the pieces most likely to disappear in 2,000 years were from the beginning the head and the arms. So no head, no arms, no feet. Half her wings invented, an unknown sculptor, an unknown battle. And she is, after the Mona Lisa, the most famous object in the largest art museum on Earth. 18 feet of monument, 30 tons of marble, about the weight of 5 adult elephants, standing at the top of a staircase in Paris that was rebuilt around her, which raises a question worth 15 minutes of your time. If most of her is gone, what exactly are we all looking at? On the 13th of April, 1863, a French vice-consul named Charles Champoiseau was digging on Samothrace, a small mountainous island in the northern Aegean. He was not an archaeologist. He was a diplomat with permission to dig and an interest in ruins. What came out of the ground was not a statue. It was 110 pieces, a torso, a section of chest, fragments of drapery, feather, dozens of separate carved feathers from wings that had shattered. No head anywhere, no arms. He shipped the pieces to France, and they reached Paris on the 11th of May, 1864. A curator at the Louvre named Adrien Prévost de Lempereur spent the next 2 years fitting the drapery back onto the body, and what emerged was recognizably a woman striding forward, with her clothes pressed against her by wind. But Champoiseau had left something behind. Scattered around the site were about 15 large blocks of gray marble, a different stone entirely from her white Parian body. He looked at them, decided they were the base she had stood on, nothing more, and left them where they lay. He was wrong about those blocks, and it would take 12 years and another country's archaeologists to show him how wrong. In 1875, an Austrian expedition arrived on Samothrace under Alexander Kahns, and with them came an architect named Eloi Hausser. Hausser looked at the gray blocks Champoiseau had dismissed, measured them, and worked out what they actually were. Not a plinth, a ship, specifically the front section of a warship, the prow, carved at full size in stone, with the deck, the sides, and the fittings all cut into the marble. The statue was not standing on a pedestal. She was landing on a ship. Champoiseau came back for them. He returned to Samothrace for 2 weeks in August of 1879 and carried the blocks off, all except the largest one, which was uncarved and which he abandoned again. It is still there, and in that same Austrian dig of 1875, and among everything else, 2 small pieces of white marble came up, a thumb and part of a ring finger. Nobody knew what they belonged to. The Austrians had also excavated a Roman statue of Victory on that island, and the obvious assumption was that the fingers went with it. They didn't fit, so the two fragments were packed up, sent back to Vienna, catalogued as unidentified, and put in a drawer at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. That is where they stayed for 75 years, the single piece of evidence that could settle the biggest open question about the most famous statue in Europe sat in a museum drawer in a different country, and no one knew it was the answer to anything, which left the question standing. What was she doing with her arms? You can see from the shoulder that the right arm was raised. That much the marble tells you. But raised holding what? In the years around 1880, an Austrian archaeologist named Otto Bendorf set out to answer it, and he had one piece of evidence that looked decisive. It was a coin, a silver tetradrachm struck for Demetrios Poliorcetes, a Macedonian king who fought a famous sea battle, and then put his victory on his money, issued somewhere between 301 and 292 before Christ. On the face of that coin is a winged victory. She is standing on the prow of a ship, in almost exactly the pose of the statue, and she is raising a trumpet to her lips. It is a genuinely good argument. Same goddess, same ship, same era, same posture. And the coin shows you the missing arms. Bendorf and Hauser built a small reconstruction model of the monument with the trumpet in place, and that model became the picture of her that scholarship carried forward. Here is the part that matters, and it is not what you would expect. The trumpet was never actually put on the statue when the Louvre carried out its major restoration. Between 1880 and 1883, the curator in charge, Felix Ravaisan-Malian, rebuilt her belt in plaster, remade part of her chest, mounted the surviving marble wing on a metal frame, and deliberately left the head, the arms and the feet off. He restored what he could prove and stopped, so the mistake never stood in the gallery where anyone could argue with it. It lived in a small model, in illustrations, in books, and in the minds of everyone who had read them. That is a much more durable place for a wrong answer to live. There was nothing to knock down, and so for 3 generations, that is what she was, the goddess blowing the trumpet of victory. She got famous in the meantime. In 1883, she was installed at the top of the Daru staircase in the Louvre, in a setting with gold mosaics, which critics hated. One of them said the decoration made the goddess look like a music hall star. In 1934, the whole setting was stripped back and made plain, and it stayed that way for the next 79 years. On the 3rd of September, 1939, the day Britain and France declared war on Germany, she was brought down that staircase on a wooden ramp, packed, and driven to a chateau in the Loire, where she spent the war. She came back in July of 1945, undamaged. She was copied too. In 1930, a French sculptor named Abel Lafleur was asked to design the trophy for the first Football World Cup. What he made was a winged victory, arms raised, holding a cup above her head, 35 centimeters tall, 3.8 kilograms of gold-plated silver, and a direct descendant of the statue on the staircase. The most watched gesture in world sport, the lifting of that trophy, is a copy of a statue that nobody could finish. And in every one of those years, in every book, in every lecture, her raised right hand was holding a trumpet, because a coin said so, and because the thing that could prove otherwise was in a drawer in Vienna. In 1938, an American expedition from New York University, led by the archaeologist Carl Lehman, began digging Samothrace properly, not for treasure, but to map the whole sanctuary. In July of 1950, a curator from the Louvre named Jean Charbonneau was working with that expedition on the terrace where the monument had originally stood, under a large stone close to the original position. He found the palm of a right hand in white marble, not a whole hand, a palm with fingers broken off. And in the same year, in Vienna, another member of that same expedition, Phyllis Williams Lehman, an American classical archaeologist who had first come to Samothrace as a doctoral student in 1938, was going through the collection At the Kunsthistorisches Museum, she opened a drawer of unidentified fragments from the old Austrian dig, and she recognized what a thumb and part of a ring finger actually were. Two people, two countries, 1,500 miles apart. Neither discovery means anything on its own. A palm without fingers proves nothing, and two fingers in a drawer prove less than that. Together they are the whole answer. The fingers were brought to the palm, they fit, 75 years after they were separated, and roughly 2,140 years after the hand was carved. It was reassembled, and everyone could finally see what she had been holding. Nothing. The hand is 27 centimeters across, a little smaller than a dinner plate. The palm is open. The surviving fingers are stretched out straight. There is no grip, no curl, no socket, no join, no trace of anything ever having been held. No trumpet, no wreath, no crown, no spear, which means she was never announcing a victory. She was greeting one. The raised arm and the open palm are a gesture of salutation, the hand of someone who has arrived, at the moment of arrival, to people who already know why she has come. Every reconstruction for 75 years had her performing. The marble says she was simply there, and once you know that, the whole monument reads differently. The wind pressing her clothes flat against her body, the wing tipping forward to hold the balance, the ship under her feet, the fact that she was carved deliberately tilted, angled about 14.5 degrees, so that she was correct from the left, from the one place on the terrace where you would actually stand. She was never a performance aimed at nobody. She was a figure landing in front of you, hand up. Even the ship under her feet turns out to be specific. It isn't a generic warship. The hull carved into those gray blocks is a type the Rhodian Navy used and effectively invented, and the gray stone itself was quarried on Rhodes. Whoever built this monument was telling you where they were from before you read a single word of the inscription. The hand went to the Louvre. Since 1954, it has been on the landing beside her, in a small glass case, palm turned upward. Roughly 30,000 people a day go up that staircase. Almost none of them stop at the case. It would be a good place to end, except that most of her is still unanswered. Which naval victory is she? There are at least 5 serious proposals in the literature, and they range from 306 before Christ to 168, 138 years of possible history, 4 different fleets and no agreement. Who carved her? The usual answer is Pythokritos of Rhodes. That name comes from a fragment of inscription found in 1891 with 2 words legible on it, and a reconstruction proposed in 1931. It is a reasonable guess. It is still a guess. Did she stand in the open air or under a roof? Still being excavated, still being argued. And there is one more answer that already died the same way the trumpet did. For decades, the accepted view was that she stood in a pool, a fountain with water below the ship, so the prow appeared to be cutting through it. It is a beautiful idea, and it was in the textbooks. Then a later excavation traced the sanctuary's water supply and found it ran somewhere else entirely, and that the surrounding stone was never built to hold water. The fountain is gone now. The trumpet took 75 years to fall. The fountain took about the same. Was she painted? In 2013, the Louvre took her down for the first time in almost 80 years and ran her through ultraviolet, infrared, X-ray and spectrography. They found traces of blue pigment on her wings and on a band at the lower edge of her cloak. So the white marble everybody photographs was, at least in part, blue. And her head has never been found. 3 separate attempts, 28 years and nothing. There is a chance it is still on that hillside. There is a better chance it was burnt for lime 1,500 years ago. Here is what the trumpet was in the end. It was not a lie, and it was not stupidity. It was the best available answer, made honestly from the best available evidence, by a serious man, and then repeated often enough that it stopped looking like an answer and started looking like a fact. It took a hand in a drawer to break it. So when you next see her at the top of that staircase, look left at the small case on the landing before you look up. That broken piece of marble is the only part of her that has ever actually told us what she was doing. Everything else, including the head, we are still guessing.